Alright, so welcome back everybody on the last episode of Dragon Ball Z. Okay, I'm joking. So on the last episode, we basically got through this portion. We're dynamically rendering out this data here where we have our titles and we have our description for our application. And we did that over here by first creating a template of what we wanted to display. So in this case, we wanted to display a title and we wanted to display a description, and so we're passing that off. And like I said before, you can just put props up here and then define it by props.title and then props.description. So it's the same thing. I just did a little bit of destructuring over here instead and just defined it up here. So you can do it either way. I just like to do it over here because to me it's just a little bit cleaner. But we defined it over here what we wanted, and then we came over here and passed it down over here as a map. So we're mapping through this state, and then as we're going through this state, we're defining the pieces of that task. So if you remember, that task had a title, and so we're telling it that, okay, from this state that's up here in this React component, we want you to dig in and grab the title and map that out. And then we also have a description, so we want you to come into this state here and just map out this description. So we have basically it would be the same as if you had a for loop and then you told it to print out an object like as it iterated through everything. So in this case, it's iterating through the first one, so it's going through this first object here, grabbing all the data that I'm saying that I want and pushing that out. And then it moves on to the second one, does the same thing, pushes it out. And it's using this styling from the task component to style it every time. So we're getting that exact same styling and everything, and we only had to write it one time. So that's basically a modular component. That's a reusable component that you can pretty much shove wherever you want. You can put in a whole different page and you would only have to write it one time. So I think that's pretty cool. Another thing that we're going to want to start doing now is we're going to want to start thinking about how to add some functionality. So there's certain things in there that I wanted to add that we just don't really have yet. So one thing that we can do is we can start extending our application. So if you see over here, we added a complete boolean that basically tells us if it's complete. Currently they're both false. Let's just change one to true, and nothing's really going to change yet because we haven't added that functionality. So what we can do is we can go back into our task where we have this really boring like static styling and just add some cool little JavaScript to this. So remember when I said in the last episode that it may look like HTML, but it's not. It's still JavaScript. So you can do really cool things like let's just add this curly bracket around here. And what we're doing when we do that is we're basically telling it that the inside of this is JavaScript. So this is no longer just a class name. Now it's a JavaScript expression with a string inside of it, which means that we can use string methods on this over here. So one thing I want to do is just put a little spacing in there just because there's a chance that we might add something to it. So we're going to use a concat, and there are different ways that you can do this, but this is the way that I'm going to be doing it. And what we basically want is to conditionally add a class value to this class name based on whether or not it's complete. So in this case, we can say we're going to be using a ternary operator. So we can say if complete equals true. Basically, if you're just passing the value in here, you're basically saying that if this is true. So it's shorthand for that. So if it's true, then we want to pass in a class of complete. Else, we're just going to have an empty string. So, and then we're just going to add a little bit of styling, which gave it that really ugly look. So I might end up actually taking that off. Honestly, like when I did the previous iteration of this the first time, I completely forgot where that styling even came from. So I did this and I was like, why does it look so ugly? Alright, so the reason why it broke over here is because we're defining this complete over here, but we're not passing it as props. So if you remember over here, when I said earlier, you can either take this off and just use props and then keep saying props.this, props.dat. In this case, we need to do the same over here. So this is our type checking right now. It's not really type checking, but it's more so just checking and making sure that you're passing the props properly. So there you go. So we added our complete, and then we added our little boolean. Well, we added our little inline styling over here, and that's just because I was lazy and I didn't want to have to add it into the CSS and make a whole new class just for that. Alright, so we have our complete, and then we have this over here. However, if we look at the actual class over here that we have, it's not really passing it into there yet, and that's because we haven't added any. We haven't actually passed this complete property into the task list. So we have title, key, and description, but we don't have complete. So we want to add complete equals item.complete, and then as soon as we do that, we get our super ugly X. So this is basically telling us that now we're done with this task and it's completed. So if I were to turn this one to true, if I could spell, then they'll both basically look the same. So for right now, we'll keep this one false, just so that we have an example of a true and false one. So that's really cool. However, that's not really doing what we want. It's not conditionally changing. We have no control over that. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add what's called an event handler. So React has its own event handlers, and you can look that up in React's documentation, but it's very similar to the regular DOM's React event handlers, only a little bit different. So you'll have to actually look these up. But what we're going to be adding now is called an onClick. So what this is telling React to do is to wait for a click event. So for a user to click this particular div, so as soon as they click it, it's going to fire this off. We don't want to define it over here, because if we define it over here, then it's going to activate on every one of them. So if I were to click this one, it's going to activate on this one as well, and whichever other ones we have. So what we're going to want to do is pass it off as an individual property of each individual component. Alright, so we're going to pass on click, and we're going to give it a name of handle click. And it's just a generic name. The name itself doesn't matter. You can call it Bullwinkle for all I care, or hot dog pants. But we're gonna call it handle click just because hot dog pants just sounds a little bit too out there. But we're gonna pass out handle click. So, and you'll notice the same pattern every single time with React. Every single time that I want to add something and define it later, I'm going to basically write it down here and then pass it up here. Or like I said, you can do props.title, props.description down here and all that. And just an example of that, because I feel like the way that I'm doing it could possibly confuse some people, and I don't want to do that. So just another example over here, in case anybody wants to see it, is you have props over here, and then here you would put props.complete, and then props.handleClick, props.title, and then props.description. So basically that's the main difference. I would have to write props once here and then write it over and over and over and over again. So that's the reason why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it over here, and you can do that in the class as well. Alright, so now that we have our onClick handler, so here it is, handle click, and we can do some cool stuff with that. We can actually go into our task list and we can pass that off. We haven't made it yet, but we will. So we can put that into our task list, and just like everything else, we can easily just define that. Now the difference with this one is we're going to pass it out a little bit differently. What we're going to do is we're going to put it inside of a function. So the reason why we're putting it inside of a function is because there's something that we need to collect from that. So we need to collect the item's ID. And the reason why we're doing that is, one, I'll actually show you what happens if you don't pass it in as a function, and it's going to be weird. So first off, this happens. So this dot handle click isn't a function because we haven't made it yet. So handle click, and then we're going to pass this off, and then we're going to pass off that ID because that's what we're sending over here. And if you're wondering where that ID is coming from, I'll put it up there in a second. But let's say click. Alright, so now it knows what it is. So you see over here, I never actually clicked it. But down here in this little warning over here, I don't know if you can see that, so I'm going to zoom in very obnoxiously. So down over here, automatically, and I'll reload it again so you can see that. But without me actually clicking it, it already fired off twice, one for each element that's on the page. And so what we're doing is we want to come over here and just add this little function in here, basically telling it that when this activates, because it'll activate automatically for some weird reason, it just does. But when this activates, for one, we want to activate this handle click, and we want to pass that ID. But if you don't do that, as you can see, it'll fire automatically. And so let's reload this and see what happens. So we reloaded it, it didn't fire automatically, and then I click it, and down here is my little click. You can ignore all the other stuff, that's just weird stuff that comes up. None of it really matters. Actually, let's see. This is good enough. Okay, so this is good enough. So every time I click it, now it comes up. So there's our console log. Okay, so what we want to do in this case is we have our handle click, and you can change that to complete click, or change complete or something, whatever helps describe it for you. But we have that, and so I'm going to do a little bit more of destructuring, very similar to what I did down here. And the reason I'm doing it up here is because everything has what's called scope. So if you don't know about scope, I definitely suggest you look that up. There's different levels of it. But in this case, this dot task or whatever is only available for everything within this space. So I want one that's available in this space because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to keep writing this dot state dot task every time. So we're gonna change it and just do const task. And if you remember from the last time when I went over destructuring, all it is, it's just like an import statement. So basically, just like how we have import task from task, we're basically saying const task equals this dot state. So basically from task, or import task from this dot state. So it's the same thing. Okay, so moving on. What we're gonna do is on the click, we're going to do this dot set state. And there's different ways to do this. This is just the way that I found that's the easiest. But we're gonna do this tasks. We're gonna reach into task. We're gonna use this dot state now, or set state. Now set state, basically what that does is it gives us a chance to go into React's state and pretty much alter the state without straight up mutating it and doing some stuff that might break the code. So essentially it's a built-in method that's built in from React component, and we can use that to reach into our state and change it. So in this case, what we're going to do is actually we're going to map through the items in here and look for the one that matches our ID. First, we're going to check the ones that don't match our ID, and then we're just going to return them. And then the one that does match our ID, we're going to change that Boolean to whatever the opposite of the Boolean is. So like I said, there are different ways to do it. This is just the way that I personally like to do it, so feel free to explore other ways to do it. So we're mapping through this, passing in our item, and again, as you can see down here, I have item and an item up here. Just so happens to be a favorite term of mine that can represent anything. You can call it element, you can call it task, it doesn't really matter. I just don't like to use the same word over and over again. I don't want tasks, and then task again. All right, so ID, and then we're gonna say not equal. So basically, if ID does not equal item.id, then we're just gonna return that item, because that means that it doesn't match the ID of the item we just clicked on. So it doesn't have anything to do with any of this. Else, we're gonna return the items that are already in the array. So these items, we're gonna return them if they're not the ones we click. So we're just gonna return them, and then we're gonna return them with a change to the complete. Item.complete equals true. Now this is another boolean. So what we're doing is basically you have your complete. Just going over this from the beginning. So we're mapping through everything, and then we're checking the IDs to see if they match the ones that we're passing in. If they don't match, then we're just going to return them. And then this is just going to keep going to this else statement for the ones that do match. So if it does match, then we're going to return this item. So we're going to return all of this with a change of this complete boolean here. So we're going to change that. And what we're saying is item.complete. So whatever it is, if it's true, if the value of it is true, then I want to return false. Else, then I want to return true. Okay, so now we can click on it, and I hope it doesn't explode, but that's very likely. But here we go. So we click it, it changes, and one great thing over here is if we go into the React Dev Tools, we can actually click on this here and then scroll on up to here, and if I click that, you can see that it changes right over here, and you can also manually change that yourself. But so another really powerful tool that you can use to follow your state around is the React Dev Tools. You can download that from the Google Chrome extension thing, and I think they also have one for Firefox, and I have no idea what Internet Explorer uses. I assume you just throw french fries at it until it does something. But okay, so handle click is done. So really cool. We have our first functionality going on over here. Now comes the really fun part. So now we get to add an input form, and essentially you're gonna see that the life cycle is very similar. We're gonna create a component, we're gonna pass that component in here, define a few things that we add into state, and then create a few functions and all that, but essentially it's gonna be the same. Alright, so I'm going to create one more component over here, and we're gonna call it form. Alright, so form, we're just going to first we're just going to do it in a basic manner. We're going to do import React, and this is just going to be a functional component from React, and then we're going to say const form equals, and I'm just going to leave this blank for right now. Matter of fact, I'm just going to put props for right now. I'll come back and change that later. Alright, so another thing you'll notice is that I don't generally put curly brackets over here. Usually a lot of people will build it out like this. They'll, if I could actually, there we go. Alright, they'll build it out like this and then do one of these, and that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What this allows you to do is this allows you to drop in a console log here if you want to console log something. This lets you build more functionality, add props, and all this other cool stuff. But if you don't really, if you're not going to be using that, then for me it's just extra typing to just do it like this, and I try to be as lazy as possible with my code and not add too much stuff to it. So we're just gonna put some styling over here, so just kind of hang out with me for a little bit while we do this, and you can copy along or just pause the video or something, but it's not a lot. So alright, create a main div and give it a margin bottom of 5, and then we're going to create a row, and then we're going to add our form. Alright, and we don't really need an action. And then for our form, we're going to want to create a form group. So dot form group, and then we're going to create a label, and this one's just going to be for title, and we can give it a title. So to do title, and then we're going to want to give this an input. So input, and that's going to have a class name of form control. And we'll come back and add a bit more stuff to this later on. For right now, I'm just gonna just give it a name. Let's say title, and then placeholder. And you can type in whatever you want here for the placeholder. It doesn't really matter for me. I'm just gonna type in buy groceries. All this is gonna be is in this case is just an example. All right, groceries, and I hope I spelt that right. I don't really know. I'm so bad at spelling, I swear. Alright, so and then we have that basic stuff done, and then now we're going to add another input, and this first one, all it's going to be is just for the title. So you see over here with this note or task or to do whatever, we have a title, and then we have a content body down over here for the description. And so we're going to basically do the same thing. So I can literally just copy this over. And like I said, this is not going to be CSS heavy. I did that on purpose. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about CSS or worrying about styling. This is more so of just going over React fundamentals. So let's say button, and then we're going to add a BTN, and then BTN primary, and then add. Okay, so cool. We got this done over here. And let's see, export default, and then we're going to export form. And so where we want to put this form, and you can pretty much add this wherever you want. You can add it at the bottom, but I don't think that's a great idea, just because as your list gets bigger, everything tends to go along with it. So I don't think you really want to do that. But there is some slight refactoring that we're going to have to do to our code in our task list. Just because right now the only thing that it's returning is this individual thing here, so we're gonna want to change that up a little bit. Alright, so first we need to import that form. Can't forget to do that. So import form from form, and then we want to come down over here. Okay, so we can still keep this return over here, but we're gonna have to add this little parentheses just so that we can make it a code block, and then from there we're going to give it a container. So dot container, and then we're going to want to pass in our form. So the reason why I'm passing it over here is because I want it to be above the actual list. So if I do it here, then it'll pop up here somewhere. Alright, so now we have our form, and then now we can return our content. So because it's JavaScript, at this point it's returning JavaScript inside of JSX, I need to put it in curly brackets so that it knows that I'm talking about this variable here. So we're gonna do that and hope that it doesn't break, and there it goes. If you're surprised that it didn't break, I am as well. So this right here, the reason why you're seeing to do title is because I was too lazy and I didn't double check everything. So we can change that over to description. So we're gonna change this over HTML for description, and I don't like typing the same thing over and over again, so I'm just going to copy that, and then to do description, and let's see where else. Buy groceries because you'll die if you don't eat. Okay, and then this will change to description as well. Alright, so there we go. And you can do extra styling to make this longer and all this other stuff. I'm just not going to be doing all of that. I'm sorry. Okay, so as you're seeing, everything's printing out over here. However, there is an issue. As we're doing this, and we'll check our state. So let's see here. So our state over here. So there's no value that's being saved here. We're typing stuff in. There's nothing that we can pass on or save or anything. It's just letting us type. It's not really letting us save the value that's being put in there. So what we need to do for that is we need to create what's called an input handler. So very similar to how we had the on click event, we're going to be doing an on change event, or so we're going to be doing an on change event for that. So with that said, there's a little bit of extra stuff that I want to add specifically to this input area. So what I'm going to do here is actually clean this up a little bit and just have it drop down so that it's more readable. Alright, so dropped everything down so that you can see it kind of cascade on down there. So one thing I want to pass in is a value, because we're going to want to have to capture the values that we do send to it. And so with that, we're going to pass the first value as title. And these are things that I'm going to shove into this area up here. So normally this would be props.title, but I don't want to do that right now. And then this will be on change. And then again, you can name this whatever you want to name it. I'm going to call it change handler. And then we can pretty much copy this, and we're going to do the same down here. Okay, so there we go, right there and there and here. All right, and this one's going to be description. Okay. So it broke because it doesn't know what any of those are. So we need to start passing some things around. And so we have title, description, change handler, submit handler. We haven't even built that one yet. So there we go. So now it still doesn't know what it is. It's still not working the way we want it to. It's not saving the values. As you can see over here, it doesn't even have a value because that wasn't defined over here. We didn't really even pass anything. So what we need to do now is we actually need to start passing that stuff into our form. So we're gonna start off with title, and we haven't added this yet. And because I'm super lazy, actually let's add that first so we know what we're talking about, because I'm about to get really lazy and I don't want to confuse you with my own laziness. So we're going to add title, and then description, and then we'll just leave it at that for now. We'll leave it at title and description. Okay, so here we go. So now what we can do is when we define that stuff, we can just go into title. And again, my laziness here, I don't like to do this, type the same thing more than once, so we're gonna say title, and description is coming from this.state. So now I can just come over here, put my curly brackets and say title, and then description. Description, I hope I spelled this right. My spelling is so bad. So one last thing that we need to pass is that on change handler that we started earlier. So change handler equals and we'll say this dot change handler. And if you really want to get rid of the this as well, you can create another one of these and just have it come from this. But I don't see it as that much of a problem, so I'll just leave it like this. Okay, so we're going to want to create our change handler here. So change handler is actually super simple to do in React. They try to make it as simple as possible. You can do it essentially in one line. So what we're going to do is create a change handler, and we're going to take the event. I'm going to write this out just so that you can see it. And so we're going to use what's called event.target. So you can look that up in MDN, but let's see, event.target. So when we look it up in MDN, they have it over here, and it's just a part of the regular DOM API. And so event.target will generally return back, it'll return back stuff from the div element. they don't really seem to go over that too well, but I'll go over it over here. So we're gonna actually console log this event. Alright, so when I type it in here, we go into our console, and then we start typing. You're gonna see an event over here. So let me just expand this a little bit. So you're gonna see this event. And so this event comes with a bunch of methods and properties that come with it. So you have event phase, cancelable bubbles, is trusted, a lot of stuff you'll never use, but this one in particular is one that we care about, target. So we have target, and then a whole bunch of other stuff, but the one that we care about is target. So let me just print out some stuff. You'll see my numbers over here go crazy, and then we come over here and it starts printing out even more stuff over here. Alright, so that's what event is. Now let's go into target and see what that gives us back. Unless I broke something, then it's not going to give us anything back. Alright, here we go. So I didn't break anything, so I'm proud of myself. But as you can see, event.target is returning back that div element, that input element. So it's returning back the input element, which has the type that we put in there, the class name, the name, which is very important for us in this case, because that's what we're going to be using in order to tell it which one that we want. Now, keep in mind that down over here, so down here, I decided to give it the name of title, and then up here I defined it by saying this.state.title. So now it has that name. So, and then the value is also going to be title. All right. So with that said, we also need to pass in. Let's see. Okay, so now what we can do is get rid of this console log here, and basically the only thing that we need to do is tell React to do a set state, just like we did up here on line 30, and what that does is it digs in here, and then we tell it which one we want. In this case, we're going to want title and description, but we don't really want to have to write it more than once. I don't want to have to do a for loop or anything crazy like that. I already have the names, so why would I want to iterate through this? So what we can do is do this.setState, right? And as we're doing this.setState, we can just reference the event.target.name, which, if you remember before, it passes it to us over here. So in this case, it's going to be title. If I were to type in the other one, I would have gotten description. And then event.target.value. There we go. So now, if we go into our React application over here, and then we go in here and we see the value, you see the value is empty down here, we can actually start typing stuff in there, and it starts populating. So now we have a reference to that value, which basically means if we were to want to submit that and save it, we have it stored in our state. So that's essentially what you want to do. Earlier it was letting us type, but it didn't really care about that. It was just like, yeah, you can go ahead and type, there's nothing I'm going to do about it. Now it's saving it to this little bucket over here. So along with the rest of our chicken wings in our bucket, it's adding more chicken wings, okay? And we can grab those chicken wings and use those. Alright, so kind of sounds like a weird Pokemon attack, but that's basically why we do this change handler. Alright, so now we're able to do that, but we're not able to do anything. This submit button, it's not going to do anything except for refresh the web page, which doesn't do anything. It's not submitting or anything. Even if we added a submit, it's not going to do anything. What we need to do is add a submit handler. So basically, we're going to go back into our form component, and we're going to add what's called a onSubmit handler. So usually in CSS and HTML and all that, you'll probably add your submit handler to your button and then create a function that'll grab this button and take that input and do something with it, you know. But in this case with React, you do it on your form. So your form is going to have that listener, and that's going to allow you to either input by pressing enter on the keys or just pressing the button, because it knows that that button is a part of the element as a whole. So we're going to add this onSubmit handler, and first I'm going to actually put it into this form just so that we can see it. So onSubmit, and then as always I'm going to call it submit handler, just because taco fingers doesn't really make much sense. Alright, so here we go, submit handler. So we added in there, nothing changed because we have to go back and define it now. So we have to go into our task list down here that we started, and basically go down to the very bottom and start adding that stuff in there. So we can say submit handler equals this dot submit handler. So there are a few things that I want to do before we start actually building out this submit handler. I want to add some error validation over here in case like you have an empty form, because that's kind of something that user experience that a lot of people tend to let go. You'll just type some random stuff in, and then you'll have an empty div over here that'll just keep popping up, and everybody will look at your app like it's crazy. So one thing that I do want to add to this is that, and we can go back into our form, and at the bottom of these over here we can add those here. So basically what it'll do is it'll make the error messages pop up below the specific location. So, and this is going to be a little bit of JavaScript, and so we're going to add title error. We haven't made it yet, but we're going to check the length. Now the reason why we're checking the length of this is because title error is going to be a string, and so a string in JavaScript is basically an array of characters. So that's why you can use length properties on it. So if you were to go say to like C, then you're gonna have to put your if you wanted to make a string, you would have to put it into an array. You kind of have to shove them into an array, but first you have to allocate a certain amount of memory into it, and then you have to put it in there. So it's a lot more detailed as to what you want to do. You can't just like type in a string and save it to a variable and just keep moving. But it's a lot easier for you to see how it works under the hood. But a string in JavaScript is really just an array of characters. So this is index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. And so that's why you can use the length property on it. So we can check if it's greater than 0, and if it's not greater than 0, then I want to return something. Now we're going to be using this React Reveal that we installed earlier over here. So if you remember, we have React Reveal installed over here. So I'm going to come back over here, and I want to import, let's say fade from React Reveal fade. Now the reason why I'm even including this / fade is because I don't want it to look through the entire package. I don't want to bring in the entire package just to use this one module here. So it'll definitely understand what you're talking about if you just delete this, but you'll have to add curly brackets around it, because basically what you're doing is getting from an index file. You're getting it from an index file if you do it that way. And so it'll import everything and just go based off of what you say. What I'm doing this way is getting it directly from the main export. Okay, so coming back down here, we're going to use fade. And fade has some pretty cool property. You can either say fade left or fade right, fade top or bottom. It's got some pretty cool properties, but I'm not going to include those in this. You can do that if you want to though. So we have we're gonna have our alert over here, so we're gonna give it a class of alert, and then dot alert danger, and this is just some basic bootstrap stuff. So row equals alert, and then over here we're gonna define title error. There we go. Title error. And then now we need to put our else statement. So else is just going to be null. So it doesn't know what title error, so I expected that to break, and naturally it did. But before we start defining stuff, we're going to do the same thing down here at the bottom. So this one's going to be called description error. So we're going to bring it in like description error dot length, and then that if that equals 0, then fade, or if that's greater than 0, sorry, fade, and then we're gonna have dot, same thing as before, so dot alert, and then alert danger, and then roll equals alert, and again that's all just bootstrap stuff. So description error, there we go. So description error. Okay, so forgot to close it, I think. Nope. Oh yeah, so forgot our else statement. So null, there we go. So now it's still yelling about that, so let's just go ahead and define that. Alright, so here, and title error. Okay, so we have this. It's still going to be probably broken. Yeah, so it's still going to be broken just because it doesn't really know what these two are over there. So we're going to have to add those in as well. So let's say title error, and we can also add that to our little list up here of things we're reaching in from the bucket. So title error, description error. And you don't have to do this. You can just say this.state for every single line and just torture your fingers. But I'm not doing that. I'm just doing it like this. So description error. And you can see how easily it would be to be prone to typos, which is why a lot of people spend a lot of time just basically looking over for typos. So these still don't exist up in our state, but basically you see the life cycle. We created something here, we're exporting it, importing it in here, using it here, and then defining it up here. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm really hoping that makes sense. But essentially we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Description error, and that's going to be empty. Alright, so now we have everything that we want. So we have our description error, there's nothing in there, so right now that value is null. Same thing for our title error, both of those are null. If we press this, the only thing that's going to happen is that it resets. So we still have to create our submit handler. So we have our submit handler here, we can add that right over here, and okay, so one thing that we do have to do with our submit handler is we need to pass in the event, just like we did on the change handler above. And what we're going to do this time is, because you saw that the original behavior of this button or the submit function was to refresh the page, we don't want it to do that. We want it to prevent the default behavior, and we're going to do that with prevent default. And that's another cool thing that you can look up on MDN if you haven't seen it before, but it's going to stop you from being able to do that. Now the first thing that I always like to do is add in a console log, just to make sure that, one, that I can spell, and two, that something that I'm building is being reached out, because you can spend a lot of time messing with your code, and if you don't just test that one tiny thing, you could be writing a lot of stuff over and over again trying to fix the wrong thing. So we're gonna click this, and click, it popped up. Cool, so that works. Alright, so we can delete this. Alright, so I want to reach back into the state, and I want to grab the title and description, which, if you remember, is going to be this stuff here and then this stuff here. So every time I type in, it's going to add value, and I want to be able to access those values. So we have a const, and then title and description, and that's going to come from this dot state. Alright, so first we want to check if the title is empty, so we can do that with the not symbol. So basically if there's nothing in there, you can also do it with title.length equals 0 and all that, but it's just a little bit longer than what I would like. So, and there are probably way better ways to do this, but I kind of just put this together so to hopefully go over some React fundamentals. Alright, so what we're gonna do is, if it's empty when you try to submit this, then I want title error to say please include a title. Alright, now if we do that, here we go. If we do that, we'll get this. And you get the nice little fade effect and all that, but it stays there forever, which I think is very annoying. So I'm gonna create an set timeout. That's basically, its job is gonna be to get rid of that, or just reset it, because I don't really want it to stick there. And you can put it for 5,000. That'll be like 5 seconds, or 3 seconds by just putting it to 3,000. You know, but essentially I'm just gonna do a this.set state and then title error, and then just reset it back to 0, or back to a blank string. Okay, so that takes care of the first one. So now we can do the same thing. Matter of fact, we can just copy this. We can just copy this and then just pass in description, and then say these. Oh, I messed that up. Hold on. Actually, no, I can do that 3 times. There we go. Description, if I can spell. Alright, so description error. So now we have it on both. So if we click it there, it pops up on both, and then it disappears. There you go. So 500 might be, or 5,000 might be a little bit too long or something. You can change that if you want. But essentially we have that. So the only thing is that it's not submitting. So we haven't, we just checked that those values, whether or not those values exist. And if they don't exist, then we're going to get those error messages. But if they do exist, then we want to do something else. So we're going to add this else statement here. So what we're going to do is say else this.set state equals tasks, and then basically we're going to return this.state.tasks. So what we're saying is we're going to return all of these that are already in there. We're going to use the spread operator. The reason why is because otherwise you're going to have 2 separate lists and all that, and it just creates a big mess where you'll have an array inside of an array and all that. So you want to be able to just spread the existing tasks in there with the other ones. So we're going to be returning this.state.task, and then we're going to create a new one that has this.state.task.length plus 1. So basically what we're doing is we're generating a new ID. In most cases where you're using a server, you'd be able to just have that server generate the ID for you, and then you just populate it with that ID. But in this case, we're going to be doing it this unsafe method because it's prone to have some issues. So I don't really recommend this if you're trying to do a production level code or application for yourself. There's better methods of doing this, but this is just how we're gonna go, because any other way would just take too long. Alright, so title, and we can add some ES6 here because we have it saved. We can, like, if something has the same name in an object as there we go, description. There we go. Okay, so if something has the same name inside of an object, ES6 lets us do something cool like this, where we can just say if title equals title, then it's the same thing, so why don't you just write it one time? Which I absolutely love. That's part of lazy coding, and so I love that. ES6 lets you do that. It's great. So we took care of that. So this right here is going to add, actually we can test it out. So this right here should add our new list item. And so let's say give bacon to the foundation. The foundation will demand all of your bacon. All right, so we can add that. So, and that works just fine. But as you can see up here, the input values are still populated with what you wrote. So we don't want that. We want to clear those out. If there were any error messages, we can delete this and all that. Any error messages, like the error messages might still be there or something like that. And so we don't want that. We want to clear everything out. We want a clean slate. So we're going to say title equals an empty string, description equals an empty string, title error is going to equal an empty string, description error is also going to equal an empty string. And then, all right, so now we can, and you can also see that every time you refresh, it's gone and all that. So you would have to add some persistence to it, either through local storage or through some other form, but that's beyond the scope of this. So the bacon foundation still wants your bacon. It will demand your bacon, and so it's going to add it there, and then you can see that everything reset. And then our validation still works. You write something really quick and it resets everything, so you no longer have that. But essentially that's pretty much it. So later on, if you guys want me to, I can go over stuff like delete and everything, but essentially this is supposed to more so just be a basic React, kind of like a beginner's course where I try to explain as much stuff that's happening as possible, so that hopefully you can expand on this. You can create your own delete buttons by taking in the element's ID. So you can take that ID, do a similar method that I had over here. I'll even give you a hint and tell you that you can use a filter method. So basically what you did over here with this handle click, you can do something very similar to it, where instead of mapping, you can filter or something like that, or you can map and then filter, or whatever you want to do. You can even pop something out or something like that if you want to. You can basically do a lot of stuff with this and expand on it. And I would love to see what everybody comes up with. Maybe even do better styling than this or something and make it more presentable. But that's pretty much it. Just to reiterate over everything that we did on this one particular, we have our app over here, which is just a presentational component. It doesn't need to be a class because it doesn't have any state or anything like that. It has no reason to be a class. And so the reason why we want to use functions instead of classes is because the browser does not have a native class. Like JavaScript doesn't have a native class function. Basically, your class function is pretty much syntactic sugar for a regular functional class, which sounds crazy, but if you've ever written a functional class, then you would be happy to have a regular the class as we know them today. So basically what that means is that this task list over here, Babel and the browser have to kind of work together and shake hands in order to destructure this into what it can understand, which would be a functional component that's just written as a regular function, and it's using inheritance and prototypes and all this other stuff in order to get all this data and use that. So if you can build something and it doesn't need to be a class, then you're doing yourself a service by changing it into a function. Alright, so with that said, everybody, I hope this video was helpful and educational in some way. If you have any questions or anything, or even just any comments about whether or not you like the video, and if you want me to do something else, if you want me to go over other things or something, then feel free to just put them in the comments below. I don't think I'll be doing these a lot, just because they do take up a lot of my time. However, I do enjoy teaching and helping people out and answering questions and just getting involved in general. And so feel free to drop a comment below, and I'll see you guys next time.